I don't think there's a city freer in this country.
I can walk down the street with my wife of 8 years. I feel safer here.
You're part of your family. We're a part of Chicago.
They're raising families, having children. They're taxpayers, and they love one another.
This is a great place to be anything.
Hi, I'm Jane Lynch, and I worked as an actress in this great city for many years. And I want to welcome you to Out and Proud in Chicago. This documentary is about the rich history of Chicago's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. Ultimately, this is a story of revolution and victory, but it's not without its challenges: oppression, invisibility, and a devastating health crisis. Our story begins at a time when the experiences of gay, lesbian, and transgender people were largely unspoken and unwritten. The term homosexual wasn't even coined until 1869. This is also a story about Chicago, a particular history that has largely been in the shadows. I'm from Chicago, and this is a wonderful place to be openly gay, but that wasn't always the case. Join me as we explore these powerful stories.
The 19th century is very different from the world we live in today. Men and women both had the ability to express intense closeness to one another, friendship, physicality, and not have it separate them out as being different.
With the Civil War raging in 1862, a 19-year-old enlisted into the 95th Illinois Infantry Regiment to fight for the North. The Irish immigrant reportedly fought in 40 battles and skirmishes. Fellow soldiers described Albert D.J. Cashier as the smallest man in the company, but extremely brave and fearless. What they didn't know was that Private Cashier was really Jenny Irene Hodgers. While serving, Cashier claimed he had a girlfriend. It's unknown whether this was used as a cover to maintain her male identity, or if she was really in a romantic relationship with another woman. After the Civil War, Hodgers continued to live as Albert Cashier, even voting in presidential elections decades before women won that right. Toward the end of her life, Hodgers was hit by an automobile. A doctor in the Veterans Hospital, knowing her to be a war hero, protected her male identity and transferred her to the Soldiers and Sailors Home in Quincy, Illinois. Unable to hide her gender anymore, she was admitted to an insane asylum, where she was forced to dress as a woman. She died 2 years later at the age of 72. Following the Civil War, Chicago developed into a boom town. But in 1871, the Chicago fire burned the city to the ground. People poured in to fill the insatiable need for labor to rebuild the city. It came to be a home for outsiders of all kinds.
This was a city where people came from all over the country, all over the world, with the idea it was a great place to make a buck. And people could do creative things, they could do things that were different, because there was nobody here to tell you not to.
It was a city of experimentation, you know. When the phone lines came in, I know Oscar Wilde came and he was very impressed by how many phones there were in Chicago.
It was also a city plagued by prejudice, poor sanitation, and a labor system that was stacked against the working class. Chicago was home to one woman who was determined to tackle these problems, Jane Addams. For nearly 40 years, Jane Addams worked and lived with Mary Rose Smith at Hull House, the West Side settlement house Addams started in 1889. At Hull House, neighborhood immigrants living in wretched conditions could receive food and help for their families and learn English. Addams took bold and socially challenging stances on protecting the rights of children and reforming factory safety standards. And Smith was by her side the entire time.
Jane Addams was not interested in men in a romantic or emotional way. Her deepest, most intimate emotional attachment was to Mary Rose Smith. She was definitely the love of her life, and Jane Addams considered herself married to Mary Rose Smith.
These 19th century relationships were called Boston marriages, where there was a romantic intimacy, but not necessarily a sexual one.
Mary Rose Smith was a very witty, charming, lovely person, and just the sort of person that Jane Addams needed as she became a big celebrity. She needed a wife. She needed somebody who would be there and would nurture her and would take care of all the travel arrangements. And when they traveled together, they always stayed in the same room. No one called Jane Addams a lesbian. People accused her of being a communist. The homosexuality wasn't on people's radar screens.
Jane Addams traveled the world to raise money for Hull House and to raise awareness for her social reform work. During their separations, Smith and Addams faithfully wrote letters to each other. In 1902, Addams wrote, "You must know, dear, how I long for you all the time. There is reason in the habit of married folk keeping together." Smith kept letters from Addams. Addams burned hers before she died.
I think that there's a very good chance that Jane Addams destroyed the letters because she did not want to be perceived as a lesbian.
As the population swelled in the early 1900s, Chicago's high-minded reformers frowned upon the freewheeling nature of some living on the fringes.
It was a city of prostitution and no morals whatsoever, which is how the Levy District started.
At the turn of the 19th century, there wasn't a city in America that didn't have a red light district where prostitution thrived. Gay life would start to appear in those parts of town that were outside the norm.
So a vice commission was actually set up to make a detailed study about Chicago and went into the areas of the neighborhoods and described the activities. And a lot of it dealt with homosexuality in Chicago and where the centers were, the people who indulged in it, cross-dressing, dual identities. And actually there were crackdowns by the police, and the whole vice district of the old levee on the south side of Chicago was virtually shut down.
Despite its tone of moral disapproval, the social evil in Chicago was one of the first written records of what gay life was like for Chicagoans.
One of the ways that men find each other and that women find each other is by consciously and deliberately violating gender boundaries. And one of the features of gay life in the past is men who cross-dress or have extremely effeminate styles, and women who are extremely masculine in appearance and dress. In many cases, that was also chosen behavior as a way of signaling to the world around you that, I am one of those people, and I am looking for other people like myself.
On the south side, a burgeoning African-American neighborhood gave birth to a renowned entertainment district, The Stroll. It was friendly to Chicagoans of all races, with a live and let live attitude toward homosexuals. And it was home to a musical star who came north from New Orleans.
Tony Jackson really was the bridge that went between ragtime and the creation of jazz in Chicago. Many of the greats of jazz, Jelly Roll Morton, who would never say anyone was great except for himself, always would say that Tony Jackson was one of his great heroes and inspiration.
And Tony was considered, among all who knew him, the greatest single-hand entertainer in the world.
And he was openly gay. One of the few references we have to Tony Jackson's sexuality comes in one of the interviews that Jelly Roll Morton did for the Library of Congress.
Tony happened to be one of these gentlemen that's called, a lot of people call him lady or sissy or something like that.
Was he a fairy?
I guess he's either fairy or steamboat, one or the other. I don't know. One or the other. I guess it's a fairy.
For all the fame that he had as one of the greatest entertainers of the South Side State Street Stroll, he made no recordings or piano rolls to tell what his singing and playing sounded like. So history basically took away his voice, took away his piano. But what we do have is a song that he wrote probably in Chicago, and that's the great Pretty Baby. Here is the commercial version of it as it appeared on Broadway in 1916. Pretty Baby actually had 3 different sets of lyrics. And the original one, it was kind of Jackson's love song to his gay lover. We've completely lost what those lyrics are. Now, needless to say, when the Broadway producers got a hold of this, they actually made it into a song that was themed around a literal baby, and even added little things in the music like a little wah-wah, which I'm sure was to the total mortification of everyone who knew the original song.
The closest thing to what Tony Jackson might have sounded like was this recording by Jelly Roll Morton of Pretty Baby. It featured Morton imitating Jackson's vocal and instrumental style.
And then sing it. You can talk about your jelly rolls, but none of them compare. Pretty baby, you're mine. Pretty baby, you're mine.
There's a segment of the new middle class who are being educated who are consciously in rebellion against the old ways of living. They create what you might call little bohemian communities where they write about free love, where they don't believe in marriage.
Women had just got the vote as well, so everything was different and people wanted different things.
One of the good Chicago examples of bohemian life was Margaret Anderson, who founded and edited a little magazine called The Little Review.
If you're going to tell the history of literature and art in Chicago, really the place to tell it is right here at the Fine Arts Building on Michigan Avenue. This is the place where 2 remarkable women, lesbians and lovers, collaborated in creating the Little Review, probably one of the most important and influential literary publications, not only in Chicago, but in the United States, and actually found its way to Europe.
If you saw a picture of the 2 of them, it looks like a 1950s butch femme couple. There was Margaret Anderson looking very feminine, and Jane Heap in a very severe haircut and a suit.
This wasn't just some tea party and reading pretty little poems. This was really redefining the whole idea of what beauty and literature was all about.
It had literature in it that represents the new 20th century style, poetry, short stories, commentary on contemporary life.
Not to mention the hard-hitting editorials and comments of Margaret Anderson. Even right here, in this issue from 1915, after the killing of the labor activist Joe Hill in Utah, Margaret Anderson wrote a passionate essay called Toward Revolution. Why doesn't someone arrange for the beating up of the police squad? That would make a good beginning. Why aren't these things done? For the same reason that men continue to support institutions they no longer believe in, that women continue to live with men they no longer love. For God's sake, why doesn't someone start the revolution?
The revolutionary couple fled to Paris in 1923 after being convicted of indecency for publishing portions of James Joyce's Ulysses. The Little Review continued overseas until 1929. In the early 1920s, one neighborhood was friendly to gay people, Tower Town.
Once surrounded by old mansions, exclusive apartment buildings, the area had fallen out of fashion. The old buildings had been remodeled and cut up into rooming houses, studios, lofts, and this became the center for Chicago's artistic community.
Filled with radical ideas and radical politics and radical art. An awful lot of historians call it Fairy Town, which is what it was. It was the first area in Chicago where gay people were quite welcome, but so was everybody else.
We use the term gay neighborhood, but it wasn't a neighborhood like that. If you walked up and down Michigan Avenue and you were a man who was gay, you might notice somebody else who you thought was gay. That made it a gay neighborhood.
You could find parties and receptions, especially for the gay community, that would be openly accepted. Places like the Dill Pickle Club.
They had amazing things. I mean, when I built my time machine and I get to go back to one place, it's the Dill Pickle Club. They had people talking from the anti-smoking campaign. The hecklers were wonderful, and the woman got up and talked about how smoking was bad for everybody, and one of the hecklers said afterwards, I've never had a cigarette in my life, but after listening to you for the last hour, has anybody got a cigarette?
A few blocks away, Washington Square Park, better known as Bughouse Square, was also becoming a hotbed for free speech. The openness attracted gays who cruised the park to find each other. One devotee of Bughouse Square emerged as a gay visionary who was way ahead of his time.
In 1924, Henry Gerber, who worked for the post office, forms an organization called the Society for Human Rights.
We started the first gay group in America, in Chicago.
He knew about this more developed gay movement that existed in Europe in the teens and the 1920s and was trying to bring it back to the United States. And he forms this organization with a small number of guys that he knows.
They produced 2 issues of a magazine, which is more like 2 sheets of paper, really. One of the members of the group, his wife found it and actually reported it to the post office, which was like reporting it to the police back then.
The post office in the 1920s, of course, is one of the major policing agents for sexuality. Because of the Comstock law from the 1870s, it prohibited the use of the males for distributing obscene materials.
And he was arrested about 6 months after he started the group. It must have sounded outrageous, having equal rights for gay people in 1924. Homosexuality was vice, and a lot of people wouldn't be seen going into a gay bar in case they were seen, so they had to meet in other ways. At Marshall Fields was a popular place in the 30s. Theater bars, hotel bars.
You are so cautious and you are so discreet and you are so basically invisible that the upside of that is that you don't get harassed very much because there isn't much of you there to harass. It also made your life relatively isolated and difficult.
Despite the repressed atmosphere in Chicago, gays did find each other at drag clubs and gala balls where cross-dressing was the preferred attire.
In 1930, in Variety magazine, which is a national magazine, they had a report of, they said San Francisco was pretty gay, but Chicago was the gayest because they had 28 pansy clubs. Some of them were on the south side. One was the Cabin Inn, which was a kind of jazz place, but it was transvestites.
One of the largest and most lavish drag balls took place on the south side on Halloween. Finney's Ball started in the 1930s.
For one day a year, they were left alone by the police. They would get 1,000, sometimes 2,000 people turning up for these balls. And it would be like Oscar night, because they would drive up in limousines and get out, and they had the lights.
Depression-era Chicago was a place where gay and lesbian people felt compelled to hide. It was a difficult world in which to come of age.
I was born in 1929, born and raised in Chicago. I sort of always knew I was gay. I was in the Mask and Shears, which is dramatic club at Lane Tech. And that's, I think, where I really came out. I was a freshman, there was a senior who made a couple passes at me, and we met in the hallway, and things happened. That really about my coming out as a gay man in those days.
I was born in 1932. We were the only family on the block that had gas lights for 2 years. No electricity. I definitely knew I was gay when I was about 10 or 11, but I also knew that you just didn't do anything. You certainly didn't tell anybody. My mother raised us very strict Catholic. If you didn't go to Mass on Sunday, there was hell to pay. The Catholic priests in those days, they were the Inquisition, practically. You did what? In a loud voice the whole church could hear. Hated to go to that priest.
In the 1930s, Professor Sam Stewart befriended Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, an openly gay couple. He claimed to have had an affair with Thornton Wilder, a married Pulitzer Prize-winning writer and University of Chicago professor. It was Stewart who introduced sex researcher Alfred Kinsey to Chicago's homosexual underworld. In 1939, Kinsey wrote, "Have been to Halloween parties, taverns, clubs, etc., which would be unbelievable if realized by the rest of the world. There are at least 300,000 involved in Chicago alone."
Alfred Kinsey's interviewing more than 10,000 men, and he was consciously looking for those who don't seem to follow normal expectations of sexuality. One of his informants was a man named Sam Stewart, who taught at both Loyola and DePaul and had a sort of another life as a tattooist. He took Kinsey to places, introduced him not only to sort of gay life and men who had sex with men, but really entirely the sort of what you might call the sexual underlife of a large American city.
Kinsey made notes while Sam Stewart performed various sadomasochistic acts with other men.
He was looking for heterosexual men who displayed different kind of fetishes of one sort or another, as well as men who had sex with men to different degrees of consistency, like you only had sex with men, or sometimes you had sex with men but you also had a girlfriend. He was really trying to create a vast spectrum and continuum of male and then later female sexual behavior.
You know, it was like he was completely obsessed. Was he gay? I think he was a little bit.
Kinsey was trying to make the invisible visible. World War II is emerging as one of the critical moments in gay history in the 20th century in the United States. And that will sound very strange to most people. Our images from the war in terms of movies, pinup girls, are all heterosexual images. But what the war does is that it takes huge numbers of young men, 16 million men, from their late teenage years into their early 30s. It takes them away from their hometowns, from their neighborhoods, from their families, gives them freedom to explore, and puts them in same-sex environments.
In the loop, there'd be 50,000 military personnel off duty downtown. There were whorehouses everywhere. Why not have sex? If they're going off to fight in some miserable war, they're going to do it now. And also, you're not going to see the other person again. So it's not like you're going to be embarrassed. Your parents aren't there. Your preachers aren't there.
Many of what those young people did was heterosexual experimentation, but many of those young people had the opportunity to act on and discover same-sex desires for the first time and not have them be just fleeting.
Then they go off to war, and the ones that come back, they don't want to go back to their small town. Gay people can't live in small towns. They run away to the nearest big city. They run here.
After World War II, a new war quickly and quietly began, the Cold War.
I think we've got a much more serious situation now in communist infiltration of the CIA.
Communism was seen as a threat to American security and the American way of life. In this time of moral anxiety, the persecution of gays and lesbians became a national obsession.
And the fact that gay life in American cities actually was becoming more visible in the 1940s and 1950s. I suppose it would probably be more surprising if it wasn't a period of anti-gay persecutions.
I like guys, but I didn't like them that way. I just liked them as buddies and friends, and I didn't want all that touchy-feely stuff. So when I got into high school, my very freshy year, I went to the show with this girl I met in high school. And of course it stormed really bad, and she lived at 42nd Street and I lived at 103rd. So she said, stay over because it's bad weather. Well, that's all it took. And then all of a sudden, bing, the light went off. This is what I am.
The farm that I was born and brought up on, it was a cotton farm, and the attitudes matched the cotton. Had my first gay sexual experience as an adolescent in '54, I suppose it would have been, when I was 12. One of those neighboring boys from, I'd say the equivalent of 2 blocks down.
I'm walking down Main Street in Peoria on a Monday night, and that's the night that all the stores were open late and the streets were always crowded. And here goes this car down the street of a bunch of guys, which at that point I did not know were gay guys. So I jumped in the car, and then that's when I finally found out in my life that there were other gay people, because I thought I was the only one.
I wasn't ashamed of who I was, okay? They had a problem. My mother had a problem with it. She would tell everybody in the neighborhood about me, and then I would come home to visit her and I'd see all these curtains moving. And so one day I thought, you know what? I have to fix this neighborhood. So I had a Chevy, put the top down, slicked my hair back, and came through like this. Yo, here I am, the queer.
If you never see your life reflected and your struggles reflected in culture in any way at all, you have a very diminished sense of what your life can be.
One place struggles were reflected was in lesbian pulp fiction. Purportedly, they were written to provide a quick, titillating read for straight people.
On the one hand, there's the persecution, and on the other hand, you can go into about any drugstore in America and find these, pulp novels about tormented, twisted, strange love, and some of them were authored by Valerie Taylor, who is living in Chicago.
Valerie Taylor was born in Aurora, Illinois, and worked on the family farm. After college, she married and had 3 sons. Her marriage eventually ended in divorce, and Taylor turned to writing to support her family.
I find The Girls in 3B very interesting. I mean, it's the first one that made it big, I think, for her. And it really is a slice of 50s urban life for young women. It's about 3 high school graduates from a small Illinois town who all come to Chicago together to make their way in the world. And one realizes that she's attracted to other women. What we know from women of the era who have written about this and talked about it, these pulp novels were cherished. They were passed from hand to hand. There is a sort of underground of communication about these novels.
A different kind of literature, one short on words, was being successfully marketed to gay men, the Physique magazine. Chuck Renslow was a photographer and owned his own physique studio by 1954. The law quickly became interested in Renslow's work.
The advent during the 50s was very, very restrictive. The modus operandi of the post office at that time was they wanted to stop you from mailing, which I was selling the photographs via the mail. So we went into court and they put me on the stand and they said, "Is this pornography?" I said, "No." "Well, is it art?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "That's up to you to decide. All I'm saying, it is not pornographic." And finally the judge, his name was Dan Ryan, I'll never forget him, says, "Let me see these photographs." And we brought the photographs up and he paged through them. He looked at the state's attorney and said, "The human body is not pornographic."
The counsel, for my benefit, define, I think he might be an expert on that.
Yeah.
Pixie.
Yeah. I should say, Mr. Senator, that a pixie is a close relative of a fairy.
McCarthy-era red-baiting tactics were matched by the belief that gay people were national security threats, susceptible to blackmail if their shameful secret was revealed. Nowhere was this fear more intense than in the military.
I was drafted, and I went to the draft board to try and get a 3-month extension because I had a year and a half of college. The lady behind the counter said, "Mabel, come over here. We have another draft dodger." Shall I tell you what I said? "You are not the one who's going to lose your fucking fat ass. I'm the one who's being sent off to Korea, not you." That's when I went right to the Naval Recruiting Station on the way home, and so I wound up in the Navy.
I almost sometimes thought the first qualification to get in the Navy was being gay, because every office, from dispersing to the CO's office, the XO, the personnel, every office was controlled by a gay guy. And we would all meet afterwards, of course, downtown at a bar called the Continental. The more open in the Navy you were, I don't think you had problems. I didn't, and everybody in my division do it.
I was actually investigated because I was getting a top secret clearance. And I sat down at a table. There were 5 military people and 1 civilian, a dark room. And the first question he said is, "Do you know what a homosexual is?" Well, I almost shit in my pants. I'm glad the room was dark. And I said, "Well, it's against my religion." I went back assuming that, they figured out that I was a gay person. They didn't. And I spent 4 years copying Russian voice broadcasts aboard the USS Midway and the Bennington.
I always wanted to send my mother money home to help her. I would work at Norfolk General Hospital in the psychiatric ward. There were patients that were gay, and they were there because their parents put them there, thinking there was a cure for this. And to sit there and watch the shock treatments and have to participate in some of that, it was terrifying.
Years ago, you actually had to look like a guy to survive. Because if they thought you were two queers, they would beat the living shit out of you, And a lot of times the girls would get raped, but nothing would be, well, that would cure you, see. Didn't you know that? That cures you.
The police will go after you, newspapers will go after you, ministers give sermons, legislatures are passing new laws that allow you, if you're gay and discovered to be gay, allow you to be institutionalized against your will. It's really a horrible, horrible time. There's no way to put a good face on it.
I didn't know the word gay when I came to Chicago. I picked that up from reading a book in the college library called The Homosexual in America. So that was an eye-opener. That book, by the way, was in the rare book room. It was because people would steal them from the stacks instead of checking them out, so they wouldn't have to sign their name on the checkout slip. What I found in Chicago, gay-wise, when I came here, there were cruising areas, public streets, public places where gay men could meet each other. I can't speak for lesbians, it's probably a lot harder for them. Bughouse Square, Washington Square Park, next to the Newberry Library.
And there was also the beach. You know, Oak Street Beach used to be gay in those days. That was, I mean, not big gay beach, but that's where all the gay people went. We used to have parties on the south side. We had quarter parties where some people called them rent parties. You paid a quarter to get in and a quarter for the drink. In the late 50s, now they were all mixed. They were black and white parties, black people and white people.
I found this bar on 99th and the Southwest Highway, and it was called Lil's. There's where all the gay girls hung out. And you could stand and drink and have a good time, but you couldn't dance. No touching, no touching, no touching. And then I found Calumet City, and that was the best, because nobody ever raided Calumet City. It was so crooked, why bother, you know? One side was all strip joints, and the other side was all seedy things and the gay bars.
In Chicago, Chuck Renslow transformed a failing bar, the Gold Coast, into the very first gay bar in the country, catering specifically to Leathermen.
As we used to say years ago, you know what a drag queen is? We're the opposite. If you walked up to the Gold Coast, there was no Schlitz signs, no beer signs, just a black door. You had to know it was there. When you walked in, you were in a little dimly lit room with another curtain behind you. And some guy was standing there cross-examining you while you were there.
Of course, the mob owned all of the near north side, with the restaurants and the crime and everything that was there. Their crime, nobody else's crime. And there were some great bars. But the guys told me that you went in the bar and you picked somebody up very fast, because it could be raided at any point in time.
They only wanted bars or businesses that made money, and we were lucrative to them. They charged us $2, $3. Now, back in the 50s, $2, $3 was a lot of money, okay? You paid that to get in, just for the privilege of walking through their door.
We were only raided once, and this is kind of an interesting thing, too. We were raided, but we were paying off every month, as most bars did. And this was before an election. Bars were always hit before elections, so they get something in the papers. I called up the watch commander, because I'd just given him money that day. And he said, oh my God, we raided the wrong place.
If the cops came around and you had boys' pants on, fly fronts, you got arrested for impersonating a male. So you take your girl into the bathroom, you turn your pants around, you change shoes with her, and yeah, you put your pants on backwards so that the zipper's in the back, and then they stand out there with flashlights like this, and in the paddy wagon,
When I came home on leave, I was 21. My friend said, well, it's time to go to a bar. We went to a bar called Sam's on Clark and Division. In the 50s, that was the gay neighborhood.
It was dirty, it was filthy, the bar, it looked like it had been built 100 years ago. And the back door was busier than the front door. It just had a little thing that said 1205. It was body to body, and it would take you 25 minutes to get from the front to the back.
We were in the bar for about 15 or 20 minutes. I think I had maybe 2 beers at the most, and all the lights went on, and the police came running in the door, yelling, it's a raid. And everybody ran out the back door, and the police had actually laid down a ramp going right into the paddy wagon, and everybody just ran right into the paddy wagon. I was tossed in a cell with a guy who was in the Air Force, and I was in the Navy. And so we partied all night, and the jailer kept pounding on the bars, said, goddamn you queers, shut up and go to sleep. The next day, my friend says, you want to go out again? And I said, sure. Well, where do you want to go? I said, let's go to Sam's. They couldn't possibly raid the place 2 days in a row.
Gay nightlife was not only relegated to bars that were routinely raided. Gay-friendly entertainment could also be found in more inviting quarters.
Robert's Show Lounge was a big nightclub type place.
Owned by I quote everybody, a very handsome black man called Herman Roberts. And he had this wonderful club on the south side that was, I mean, Della Reese was there, Dinah Washington was there, and the Jukebox Review was there, all these drag queens. Tony Midnight designed all the clothes and was the MC for the show.
And this was the most awesome thing I've ever seen in my life because they were all singing live. The black women were doing Billie Holiday, Pearl Bailey, and I mean, they had beautiful voices.
This is a traveling drag show that is probably from Miami, and it traveled around the country, and it was one of the grandest shows that I've ever seen in my life.
They did production numbers that were unreal. Stormy, who was the absolute lead dyke singer, was just fantastic.
I think it was 25 men and one girl, or 25 girls and one man, or something.
And they were all like, oh, that's gotta be the girl, that's gotta be the girl, that's gotta be the girl. All of a sudden, this stripper comes out, and she's doing her number, and she's got her little pasties on and everything, and her little G-string and everything. And she pulls that little pasty thing off, and there are no boobs there, and their jaws all dropped. And then they realized Stormy's the only girl. And she actually sat at our table and talked to us. She's a cool lady. I mean, I was like almost enthralled with her, like, wow. You know, it was like a movie star.
I went there probably a dozen times, each time they came in.
On Halloween, we got to wear tuxedos. You know, it's the only time you could wear men's clothes out in public.
When it really disappeared and got screwed up was the Schuberts picked it up. They sent all their own choreographers, directors. They didn't understand the subtleties and the irony of drag. And they kind of dumbed it down until it was nothing.
When I went into the physique Chris studio and started doing physique work, a friend of mine told me that there was a young artist he knew that thought might be good to do some work for me. A week or so later, I was walking on the beach, Oak Street Beach, and I saw this beautiful boy laying there. And I didn't know what to say, and I saw my friend who had talked to me. And I said, you know who that is? And he said, well, that's the artist I was telling you about. But he was not interested in me in the least. But I kept at it, and we finally became lovers. He was the artist, ATN. We explored leather together and came out in it.
I had moved to the north side. I was going to the University of Illinois at Navy Pier, and I'd drive to the south side, 57th Street, and go swimming. I was over there one day, and I saw this man walking by who was so good looking that I whistled. And my friend says, don't do that. You don't do that. I said, I don't give a shit. He is so good looking. I was getting on my bike. I was ready to go back home, and I saw the same guy. And I said, this is fate. And I went right over and said, I got a light. And that was July 17th, 1963.
In 1961, Illinois adopted the American Law Institute's revised Model Penal Code. It repealed the law prohibiting sodomy, which had been used to prosecute homosexuals.
It's no longer a crime for two men in an apartment to be having sexual relations with one another.
Well, someone didn't tell the police, that's for sure. Because although homosexuality was legal between two consenting adults in private, the police still managed to raid the bars, and because that was actually in public.
Coming to Chicago when I first came, it was really scary for gay and lesbians because you didn't know if you were gonna get kicked out of a rooming house for being gay. You didn't know if you were gonna get fired from a job for being gay. I went into a bar, and that was sort of it. And of course, the bar was advertising for bartenders. I applied for the job, and he asked me if I was a bartender. I said, I'm a great bartender. I'd never made a drink in my life. Well, the Chesterfield was a drag bar, and my character was Felicia, and I was a comedian, and not a very pretty drag, but a comedian.
There was drag bars all over this town. That's when there was this huge influx into Chicago of drag queens, from Detroit, from Atlanta, from all over the country, because they thought it was going to be easier. Actually, it wasn't any easier. Well, maybe it was easier. At least they could work.
My first bar raid, I was behind the bar. Police came in, bought 2 or 3 people a drink. I didn't know by serving a drink, they could charge you with soliciting for prostitution and keeper of a disorderly house. And when they threw me in that drunk cell with about 18 other people, it was even more petrifying. Thank God that time I only had to stay in there 4 hours. And it got to be a point after that, if you worked in a bar, you always took $25 or $50 on your pocket and a pack of cigarettes, just in case you were going to jail. And some night they would make 4 or 5 raids in one night.
I can remember living at home in 1964, I think, when there was a gay bar raid, and one of the major daily newspapers printed the names of all these people. And the following day, some of them had committed suicide, they lost their jobs, they lost their family. I thought this should not be happening.
Louis Gage's was a bar on the Mannheim Road. It was a gay party bar that everybody went to. The myth about the bar was that it stood between 2 townships and could not be raided. That wasn't true. Sheriff Ogilvie raided the bar, 84 were arrested, rumors of suicides, went to court, nothing happened, as with all raids back then.
The front page public shaming listed names, addresses, and occupations of everyone arrested.
I don't think anybody kept their jobs. Ogilvie was making a name for himself. I think he had aspirations to be governor.
Richard Ogilvie was elected governor in 1968.
These lurid newspaper articles began to appear about gay bar raids and naming people on the front page of the newspapers who had been arrested. I got a mailing announcing Mattachine Midwest's having a public meeting. I immediately went to the meeting. It was in a very opulent ballroom of the Midland Hotel.
Mattachine Midwest was formed by a group that included author Valerie Taylor and civil rights attorney Pearl Hart, who in her youth worked with Jane Addams at Hull House.
A gay organization such as Mattachine Midwest tried to do everything that was needed to be done. It tried to offer counseling if they were having legal difficulties, for psychological problems, religious problems. It tried to create a social setting for people to meet each other, reform police practices such as raiding bars and arresting people on the street.
Mattachine Midwest worked alongside other organizations devoted to furthering the cause of gay rights, like the Daughters of Bilitis and One of Chicago. Bill Kelly helped produce the organization's newsletter, a resource for Chicago's gays and lesbians.
The staff looked forward to the newsletter sessions as much for their own sake as for the fact that it was a good way to socialize with Valerie.
I grew up along Chicago Avenue between Orleans and Sedgwick. I went to a place that was called Bug House Square, and it was the perfect environment, actually, for gay people to be in. It was a very eclectic kind of mixture of people who all had something in common, being able to speak freely and being able to be freely who we were. And the only people that would adjust that for us would be the police.
I was dating this guy, and he was the guy that every girl wanted. And as it turns out, the guy that everybody wanted was also with my brother. And one night I heard this noise down the basement, and I went downstairs and him and my brother were together.
I was one of those gay teenagers that became depressed. I had internalized all those negative things that in that era were told it was to be gay. I had a friend that killed himself when he was in his late teens.
And I began to spend more time, actually, with my best friend. And one night I decided that I wanted to kiss my best friend. It was very confusing because I had no idea where that came from. And that's the first girl I ever kissed, and I want to say I was 12 years old.
My father had put out a missing persons on me, which eventually led to my being incarcerated for running away from home and being a homosexual. And I remember being in court with my father and the judge turning to my father and saying, "Are you aware that your son is a homosexual?"
October 9th, 1967, I came out sexually, but the next day I totally freaked out. I mean, I literally went to church the next day and I'm like, oh my God, what is this? Am I going to suddenly start walking a certain way? Will I not get hired because I wanted to be a teacher at that time? Will I get fired? Will that mean I'll have to be a hairdresser?
I was locked up because I was gay and I was black. When you're institutionalized with a group of men, you have to establish a sense of do not go there with me. Gay people stuck together. But for the most part, I read a lot.
At that time, in the 60s, gay people could not dance in a bar. There wasn't any real place that we could go to hang out. And when we would tell people, like if someone would say to me, Bernita, why aren't you getting married? I would say, well, I'm gay. And they would, well, what's a gay?
When I was released from incarceration, I was 17. For me to get to college, I had to go via a mentor who was an older gay man. I was washing dishes and working at Dr. Scholl's and any kind of job I could get kind of thing. And he said, Joel, why don't you think about going to college?
In the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, in New York City's Greenwich Village, a raid on the Stonewall Inn turned into 3 nights of rioting. The police faced an angry mob of gays, lesbians, and drag queens who battled for their right to exist free of harassment. It was a new moment in the fight for equal rights, the beginning of gay liberation. It came to be known simply as Stonewall.
I had been to Woodstock, and it was at Woodstock that I first heard about Stonewall. So when my friend Mikkel Brody and I got back from Woodstock, we thought, well, we've got to meet some other gay people and start a gay group in Chicago. Well, that was easier said than done.
If you want to understand gay liberation, you just have to understand that in the 1960s, there was a sense alive in the country that everything was up for grabs. Gay liberation had a style that looked like the style of the 60s.
We put an ad in the Chicago Seed, which was the hippie newspaper at the time, to call FBI list, which was my phone number, if you wanted to meet and talk to gay people. And my phone would ring all day and half the night. People would call to say I'm gay and my parents have kicked me out. When I think of it now, here I was 19 years old and somebody would call me up and say, I feel like committing suicide because I'm gay. And I would be the person to talk to that person. Well, I didn't have a master's degree. I wasn't a licensed clinical social worker. I was just a teen myself.
Former University of Chicago student Henry Weemhoff started a gay liberation group in Chicago by placing an audacious ad in the school's newspaper, The Maroon, looking for a gay roommate. Folks who answered it joined him to form Chicago Gay Liberation.
When Henry Weemhoff said that gay and lesbian people were 10% of the population, he said, you know, like here at U of C, there are 2,500 undergraduates. That means there are 250 gay and lesbian students here. I was like, really? He said, let's have a dance. And if we have a gay dance on campus, we'll all be able to see how many gay people there are. I was so nervous. There'll be 20 people here. There were over 250 people at this dance. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, partying like you would not believe. I guess you would believe, because we are gay, after all.
Those who were organizing gay liberation at the University of Chicago originally knew about us, and if I'm not mistaken, they contacted us to let us know about the gay liberation organizing activities there. And we were more than happy to hear about it and to publicize it to the extent that we could in our own newsletter.
Mattachine was not openly gay and flaming in the way that we were, because we were the gay hippies. And they were, at the time, more of the gay conservatives. They were too conservative for us.
It took a lot of nerve to come out, period. at all back in those days, much less to have gay liberation meetings in your house.
Every group has a parade in Chicago. You name the group, they have a parade. So instead of a parade, we had a march. It was a statement to people in Chicago, yes, they're gay people, and we want to have real visibility, and we want to be treated as a minority community.
The march was only one of 3 around the country that was held to commemorate the Stonewall riots a year earlier.
When Gay Liberation organized this march, I was interested in attending and did. Well, I personally wasn't fond of chanting and marching along the street and drawing attention. I'm not that kind of person, but I was interested in reaching people, and if this was the way that, one way in which it could be done, I was willing to take part in it.
The first march, I was still on the sidelines because I had this fear, you know, I had a government job at that time. So this fear of, gee, if someone going to turn on the, you know, news, the nightly news, and see me there, and then bam, my whole world would fall apart.
The route was symbolic. The marchers were leaving behind the cruisy and closeted world of Bughouse Square to emerge into the daylight of Chicago's Magnificent Mile near the Water Tower.
However, along the way at some point, leaders of the march decided to keep going to the Civic Center in the Loop. I didn't follow them because I was more of a believer in sticking to the plan. They danced around the Picasso statue. And I know it had an effect on Michigan Avenue shoppers because they'd never seen anything like it.
I can remember the look on the faces of people. It was this feeling of empowerment. Everybody I looked at, there was tears in their eyes, there was a little bit, there was joy, there was anger. You knew something was happening. You knew you were never going to go back. I was going home, I was on the 36 bus, and I knew my life had changed. I knew that the rest of my life would not be the same. All those years of repressing who I was, living a lie, you know, that part of my life is over.
I was the first one in my family that went to college. We would go hang out in the chapel at night. And we would hang out in the chapel at night because of the wine that the priests would use for Mass and, you know, for communion. And there was this one girl who we would always go do this together. And that was my first real lesbian kiss. She actually became my girlfriend for 2 years. Then I knew I was a lesbian. And the interesting thing was college had all of the bigotries that any place else had. I can remember the psychologist asked me a question. He said, if I could give you a pill and you could turn white, would you take it? For whatever reason, that question changed my life. I realized that I wasn't a follower, I was a leader.
One of the under-commented upon things about gay liberation, lesbian feminism, the whole coming out process and the growth of a movement is that after you come out, you are crazy as a loon for 2 to 3 years. It so completely overturns the way life is. And so gay organizations are also filled with drama and conflict like you can't believe over sometimes the most insignificant things. Any gay or lesbian activist who doesn't tell you about how hard it was as well as how exhilarating it was isn't telling the whole truth.
At one point, gay liberation was not just gay liberation, but it was gay liberation in reference to black liberation, in reference to women's liberation, in reference to Hispanic liberation.
Chicago Gay Alliance was formed by some people more willing to directly engage government for the sake of advocating social change.
The people of color who were involved in gay liberation became very disenfranchised. And we formed our own organization, which was Third World Gay Revolution.
It was February 1971, and Chicago's gay rights advocates opened the city's first gay community center in an aging bungalow on Elm Street.
I was so afraid to walk in. I wasn't sure if people were going to have three heads, two, you know. It was really a refuge for those gay people that just did not want to go to the bars. It was the hub. You had people coming from the New York Gay Activist Alliance, people from San Francisco.
One of my favorite organizations was the Lesbian Feminist Center, which was really one of the first lesbian centers on Halsted Street. It was a storefront that we rented, and it was run by volunteers. Actually, we lesbians had the first spaces on Halsted Street. Then little gyms opened up, and the gay bar scene was going.
The gay liberation moment, in a sense, is one of those leaping moments because a whole bunch of people are breaking with the past. They're very self-consciously breaking with the past, and they're saying that we're going to create a new world. But a lot of the people around them aren't paying any attention whatsoever. They're living their own way.
I came to Chicago to do graduate work at Northwestern when I was 29 years old. I did, with a friend from Northwestern, from the theater department, come down. He wanted to take me to some bars. I met a man there who was the bartender. We had a date. He came home with me, and he never left.
We opened Ms., which was my initials, and that's when Ms. came to be popular. So we had like 400 to 450 women in there all the time. It was wonderful. But like any bar with women, it doesn't last long. Women do not support bars as much as men.
After opening a gay bar in the Rough River North neighborhood, Jim Flint needed a hook to bring people to the baton.
I thought we'll start a drag show, and to get more people interested, I would start twirling back and forth across the street on roller skates. And then I would stand in the middle and twirl the baton. And of course the traffic would back up maybe a block or two sometime. Herb Cupston put us on his show, and he called me one day and he said, Jim, I got a surprise for you. And I said, what is that, Herb? And he said, I want to bring Phil Donahue and Marlo in. After that, we did about 8 shows for Phil Donahue, and then everything opened up.
This is 1973. Sexual liberation was at a peak, especially among the male community, which is what I knew best. Folks who would go to Howard Brown for their testing and their VD shot, or what we called it, or they would find it a great place for cruising. These were mostly folks who worked in bars. I didn't, frankly, at that point know anyone who was closeted, because anybody who was around that world was already out.
We're talking about 1973. This is the early period of the quote-unquote gay liberation movement, and it was like cataclysmic. It was kind of like jumping off a cliff, and no one could see what the bottom was going to hold. And life was changing, and it was a drastic decision. Am I going to come out? Am I going to act on these feelings? And what does that mean for my life? I mean, it was scary.
Lesbians who, through gay liberation and through feminism, are becoming very politicized. An alternative, almost anti-commercial lesbian world develops in the 70s all around the country, and Chicago is one of the major centers for it.
Women's newspapers like Lavender Woman, organizations like the Chicago Women's Graphics Collective, and spaces for art and music emerge.
Music was a big part of, I would say, the women's movement at the time, and the idea was creating women-only spaces where women could articulate their politics through their music and their art. There was a women's rock band called Mother Right, and they asked me if I would do sound one night, and then I became their manager. We played in St. Louis and in Iowa, in the Chicago area.
Oh, gee, I guess it's good for me. Homosexuality, I never knew how butchy I could be.
At the Lesbian Feminist Center, which we call the LFC, a musician named Alex Dopkin, who considers herself a lesbian separatist, had a concert. She said, now I'm going to do this song and I'm going to ask all non-lesbians to step out. It created a big hubbub. I personally felt it was a very divisive thing to do. Many people left and didn't come back.
One of Chicago's most significant women-only institutions was Mountain Moving Coffee House, an alcohol-free space that hosted concerts and events. Mountain Moving grew out of a women's crisis hotline called Wicca. The cheeky reference to witchcraft stood for Women in Crisis Can Act.
It could be anything from someone who's coming out and having problems to issues of domestic violence. I need an abortion. Is there someone that you know that will do abortions? It was anything. I'm having trouble with my husband. I need daycare. Could be any problems like that.
Novelist, poet, and activist Valerie Taylor joined writer-historian Marie Kuda and others to hold yearly lesbian writers' conferences in Hyde Park.
We had hoped to create some kind of a women's economic network where women who were writers could then go to women presses and have them printed, and go to women publishers and have them published. They'd be sold in women's bookstores.
You always have, these things going on at the beginning of any revolutionary movement. And this was a revolutionary movement. Women's revolution into literature.
Around the same time, against great odds, the Chicago Gay Alliance began the push to pass a non-discrimination law in Chicago.
The legislation would briefly outlaw discrimination in the areas of housing, public accommodations, and employment based on sexual orientation.
There was an alderman named Clifford Kelly, a black alderman from the South Side. A wonderful, he's still around. And he kept putting in a gay rights ordinance in the city hall year after year after year.
Nobody really wanted to come out with it because you had the Catholic Church preaching heavy against it.
It was slow going, but they were persistent. Chuck Renslow, now a North Side precinct captain, experienced a prophetic moment with the mayor at the time, Richard J. Daley, at City Hall.
Old Mayor Daley broke ranks, came right up to me, and Chuck, he said, your time is coming, and kept on walking. He died right after that. I don't believe the problem was the alderman. I believe the problem was our own community. We had to educate the public what we were all about.
Most people were still in the closet, and they felt freer to go to gay bars because they were pretty sure the police wouldn't harass them anymore. But they weren't coming out at the workplace, and they weren't coming out at school, and they weren't coming out to their families.
This is the poster that I created when I wanted to come out to my family. I was 17, and I had written a note at the time that I made it, which is really fortunate. I wanted to make it beautiful, something that would convey how much being gay meant to me and how beautiful two men loving each other was. So I made this. Dwight Okita, July 5th, 1976. My mom is really a funny person. She thought it was just a political thing that I had empathy for people who are gay. And I said, well, no, actually, I am gay. She did all those questions that parents go through. Was I too close to you? It's like, how can you be too close to your child? And then a year later, I said, well, Dad, I told you I'm gay. What do you think? And he said, you're my son. And because he was philosophical, there were many homosexual writers that he admired. And he told me the names of writers that were homosexual. And I had a pretty fortunate coming out.
Marge Summit opened a new bar in Wrigleyville called His and Hers. Business was fair the first years, partly due to the roughness of the neighborhood.
We started doing the music. My lover was I think a Baptist, There's the ones that sing a lot of church songs. And she would sing all those, This Little Light of Mine, and all those. It was like holy roller time at the bar. I mean, it was wonderful. It was so wholesome. And then slowly, we got known through the straight world that one of the best open mics to go to. Erwin Helfer came there, Whacker Drive played there a lot, Pudgy, a big entertainer here in Chicago, played at my club a lot. And it was a bar that you could bring your mother to and say, Mom, this is a gay bar. And she'd say, well, that's great. It's got food, it's got entertainment.
The multifaceted Chuck Renslow hired longtime activist Bill Kelly to manage his myriad business ventures. But Renslow's motivation was possibly to encourage Kelly's activism.
He was aware of my gay activism and wanted to support it in some way and told me that I could consider that as part of my job.
In March 1977, the Carter White House hosted a meeting of national gay and lesbian leaders with Midge Costanza, the administration's public liaison. It was unprecedented, and Kelly was there.
I'd been to Washington several times as a kid, and this time I was actually going to try to make some change in the government by being there, not just as a tourist. So that was very satisfying.
The group briefed Costanza on the ongoing challenges gays and lesbians faced.
Jimmy Carter himself was at Camp David that weekend, so we didn't run into him, but we still thought it was a productive meeting because it opened doors in the administration's departments.
Come to the Florida sunshine tree. Hey, come back, little orange bird.
There was a formidable backlash. Anita Bryant, a former Miss America known for her TV ads for the Florida Citrus Commission, became the spokeswoman for a national campaign called Save Our Children. Its goal was to prevent anti-discrimination ordinances.
What better career than to become a religious fundamentalist attacking homosexuals? It's a money maker.
The first overt community demonstration I'm aware of was against Anita Bryant.
She helped to literally get repealed in South Florida, a human rights ordinance there that protected gay people. And she was appearing down here at the Medina Temple.
She's coming to Chicago, and we were furious. Everybody started orchestrating the march around Medina Temple.
Most of us didn't know what a protest march was. We really didn't have a sense of protesting.
We got out thousands of people. We marched around Medina Temple. We kept a lot of folks away. We didn't try to physically prevent people from going in there, but it was a march.
I remember the march because there was a bit of a police ruckus. There was an agreement that this was going to be a peaceful march. We had marshals, and one small splinter group decided they were going to confront the police.
It was really a flashpoint. It was the realization that we could pull out large numbers of people, people from the so-called bar community, people from the political community, people who lived in the suburbs.
That's when screwdrivers were a big thing in the gay bars, when everybody quit drinking them. And they got rid of her real quick.
I think that we cost her her career. Other cities probably could have did it, but they took her off the orange juice, and you didn't hear too much about Miss America, Anita Bryant, too much after that.
And I do think that that coalition birthed some of the people who then got active in bringing the anti-discrimination bill to the city council and getting it passed through the city.
Oh, Anita, don't you pray for me, 'cause I'm happy with my living in the gay society.
But that was the three things that changed things, I think. Stonewall, Anita Bryant, and AIDS.
The late 70s were a heady time for Chicago's LGBT community. The annual Pride Parade was a fixture on the June calendar.
You know, there were no politicians at that point in the parades. There were no corporate sponsors. Pretty damned exciting, frankly.
And my mother, after a while, was like, you know, there were people at church, oh, we saw your son. This is back in the 70s. We saw your son leading the gay parade. She, oh, yeah, my son organized the gay parade.
Chuck Renslow started an annual competition for the leather community at his bar, the Gold Coast, called International Mr. Leather.
Well, the second year, a guy from Australia won. The gay press picked this up all over the world.
And gay sports leagues began to spring up. Jim Flint helped organize a league that played the very non-Chicago game of 12-inch softball.
Of course, I didn't know what a 12-inch softball was. Then we found out there was a network of teams all over the country. Then they said, well, let's get into basketball. So there wasn't a lot of gay guys that played basketball. And if there was, I couldn't find them.
We had a baseball team. We played out of Horner Park. We had a very good baseball team, but the umpires didn't think so. Number one, we were gay. Number two, half my team was black. Okay, I was one of the few bars that let a lot of black people in. You know, a lot of the other gay women bars carded them with 90 million IDs and, you know, blah. They thought it was unfair because a bunch of dykes, they're like guys, you know. No, they're not. They just play better baseball, that's all. And you had every reason to complain.
Chicago colleges and universities continued to play an active role in the life of Chicago's LGBT students. Northeastern Illinois University, on the city's northwest side, emerged as an unlikely hotbed of gay academic work.
Northeastern was a commuter school, but it was really a very political place in the mid-70s. They had a very left-leaning sociology department, and then they started a criminal justice program, which probably outside of Berkeley was the only left-leaning kind of Marxist criminal justice program in the country.
I thought I wanted to be a social worker. You know, I wanted to serve the world, save the world. But then I found out that my social work was through movement. I was a sociology major, so I got an assistantship to the graduate program, and I co-taught a course in human sexuality.
Donna Ivan taught a sociology of sexuality course, and so she loved to have a gay teacher co-teach it with her.
It was a wonderful experience because, of course, I was out, and a lot of people took the course to talk about homosexuality.
After Joel graduated, I got the mantle and I taught it with Donna, and it was very empowering. I remember doing some of those classes and having people write down questions so that they didn't have to ask them out loud and be embarrassed by the questions. And the questions ranged from everything from, what do lesbians do in bed, to, you know, what do your parents think?
It was a radical department, actually. And I went through I went through their graduate program there until I opened my studio. And when I opened my studio, I quit school.
I went to Northeastern, I think in the summer of '79. There was four of us, 4 women. I don't know how we got onto it, but we began to think about gay stuff and had heard about these lesbian bars. And I remember walking in, it was Petunia's on Southport. I couldn't believe how many people there that I knew from school. I went out to have a cigarette with a woman. This guy comes up to us and he starts to harass us. She pulled out a gun. She said, "You get the fuck out of here." And I went, whoa. And we went to CK's on Diversity, and it was like home. I didn't recognize people, but I recognized self. Of course, I didn't have much time to really get settled in, because within a very short period of time, the police came and people were running out the door and tripping and falling, and I was like, you know, almost like a deer in headlights, I guess. And so this woman who, she's like, you know, must have been like a cartoon, you know, picked me up my collar, threw me on her motorcycle and said, "Come on, we gotta get out of here." I remember going home, and I was living with a man then, and I said, "Oh my God, I might be a lesbian."
I was 17, I was living in Midlothian, so I decided, you know, I'm gay, you know, I gotta meet the gay community. Someone had told me, if you want to meet the gay community, it basically is around Clark and Broadway and Diversity. I actually wore a little pit helmet, like I was on my adventure. So I went to a bar at about 8 in the evening, and it was dead. I said, gay people don't even go to bars. What is this? And I thought, you know, this isn't turning out to be the adventure I thought it would be. I think I'm going to have to just pack it in. I talked to someone at Circle Campus who said, "Oh, don't go." No, because there is an event where you will meet 6,000 gay people in one night. It was at the Aragon Ballroom. It was called Cruising the Nile. And I didn't have to hug my pillow that night. I hugged a real person. And boy, that was more than I expected when I set out on that weekend, you know. I didn't think I'd get lucky.
Those were the days that the party was still going on. The community was convinced that this plague only happened on coastal cities. New York, San Francisco. Wow. Were they wrong?
Jimmy Russell was probably the closest, and he managed one of my bars. But he was also, oh God.
I have a telephone book at home that from the 70s that's about this thick, and as all of my friends were listed in that book, and as they died I would put a diagonal line across their names and addresses, and each page of every page of that book has a line across it. And there's nobody that I know in that book today from that period.
And a lot of softball players that when you would go to a tournament, the guy where you didn't even ask where somebody was.
Mothers, fathers, uncles, sisters, brothers, children, you know, poof, like a puff of smoke.
You can't have a disease that just affects gay people. It's impossible. I mean, what do you need to get this disease? You have to listen to show tunes, or, you know, I mean, what? You have to be good at designing something, or you got to be a hairdresser? I mean, it's nonsense. And people fell for it.
To be honest, do you think they cared if faggots and junkies died? I don't think so.
I went to the stamp guy and I told him what I wanted, and he designed me the gay dollar stamp. And we ended up buying 600 of them. I wanted everybody to have a gay dollar, hand it to somebody. Did you get AIDS? No. And then the ultimate, who said we don't live in their neighborhoods. $17 million later, honey, we live everywhere.
You can find in almost all of the AIDS organizations women being a part, and lesbians in particular, being a part of the AIDS mobilization effort.
Baby, we stepped up big time. I think lesbians stepped up so big.
Suddenly lesbians were running everything, you know, all the charities, and that's when the separatism stopped.
As we came out of our ignorance. I moved to Chicago to work with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Chicago in 1985 and spent 3 years in hiding. And I say 3 years in hiding because I was terrified that someone would find out that I was a lesbian. And I think what terrified me was that people would think that meant I couldn't work with kids. And that people would assume that if I was a lesbian, that I was a pedophile. So I made a choice that I was going to stay in the closet and I was going to do my youth work.
A big part of the gay male community was not political, was not feminist, and was not socially active. Many more women were part of the political movement and came to lesbianism through their activism in the feminist movement.
I personally always believed in working from the inside. I think I could have gone into politics if I wasn't a gay man. When George Dunn wanted me to run for an alderman, and I refused to do it, I told him, look, I own a leather bar. They're going to equate that with people beating each other. It's not true, but they're going to. I run a bathhouse. They're going to equate that with prostitution. It's not true, but they're going to. I said I would hurt the party more if I ran. That's, I think, has held me back.
I thought it was time. The only way we're going to stop all this nonsense is to run for politics. And nobody else was doing it. And I said, even if I don't win, I'm going to encourage other people to run. And that was my whole motive. I never wanted to be a politician, but I wanted to get other people involved.
1987 was a banner year for openly gay candidates. Bolstered by Mayor Harold Washington, who had established the city's first committee on gay and lesbian issues, and encouraged by endorsements from the city's major newspapers, it seemed the time had come to elect an openly gay candidate to local government. No candidacy inspired more hope than that of Vietnam vet Dr. Ron Sable for alderman in the 44th Ward.
Ron Sable was a physician. I think at the time he might have been HIV positive. He was an incredibly bright young man. He was a humanitarian.
Ron was one of the two founders of the first clinic at Cook County Hospital. They called it the Sable Sharer Clinic for people with HIV.
Most of us supported Ron Sable. It was a brilliant race.
It was so exciting.
Hi, I'm the independent candidate for alderman of the 44th Ward. Hello. Are you registered voters?
And gave a lot of people hope.
And it just galvanized a lot of political energy and brought a lot of gay people into electoral politics.
He would have been a fantastic alderman. He really was ahead of his time. We just didn't have the savvy that Ron needed.
It would be another 15 years before Tom Tunney became the first openly gay member of the Chicago City Council.
It was the beginning of thinking about how are we going to get more gay candidates and where are these gay candidates going to come. And as taxpayers and voters, we're already supporting candidates. And what would it be like now to support openly gay and lesbian candidates? Because I think the statistics are very high, maybe 92 out of 100 GLBT people vote.
We had a new mayor in Chicago named Harold Washington. And Harold Washington knew he would need to develop a new coalition of voters. A majority of the African American community, Latino, lakefront. And when you say lakefront in politics, that's code for gay and lesbian. That meant we needed to bring this gay rights ordinance for a vote.
Harold Washington called me in his office, and I said, you know, Your Honor, I said, we really want to bring the gay rights bill up. I said, we have to know who is for us and who is against us. We worked on a lot of aldermen, and very quietly, I think we canvassed all of them.
I was asked to come to a planning meeting for a large rally that was to take place before the vote to bring people out and get people interested. There was a proposal being pushed around to ask all the gay bars to close on Sunday night. And I said, well, let's rent some buses and let's use the bars as places for people to meet to get on the bus to come down to the rally. Great idea, Art. What was your name? Art Johnson. Why don't you take care of that? So how am I going to do this? Well, I got a Gay Chicago magazine with this listing of bars, and I thought, well, who do I know? And I began with people I knew, and I called them and asked them if they would come up with some money to rent buses to get to the rally. And to my surprise, well, maybe not my surprise, I guess I must have thought it could happen. Everybody said yes, everybody. And we thought, wow, wouldn't this be wonderful if it were not private buses, but CTA buses? And when these buses arrived at Daley Plaza and surrounded Daley Plaza, for a moment we were not 10% or 5% or 2%. For a moment we were 100%. And frankly, for most of us, the idea of being openly gay or lesbian at Daley Plaza was in itself scary and invigorating.
It came to that morning of the city council. A lot of kids didn't want to bring it up because we're going to lose.
The issue at hand, a measure that would outlaw discrimination on the basis of, quote, sexual orientation in housing, public accommodations, and employment.
We jammed the chambers. The vote came. There are 50 members of city council. We had 18 yes votes.
And I remember Chuy Garcia and Luis Gutierrez, who had the most to lose from the Catholic Church. They told the cardinal this wasn't a religious issue. This was a civil rights.
I remember folks coming down the stairs from the second floor of City Hall, which was where the council chambers are. And someone began singing a very quiet song. We are a gentle, angry people. And it was lovely. But I will tell you, it was the last time that the words gentle were used, because we stopped being gentle and we began being angry.
Johnston led the final push to get the ordinance passed, with Rick Garcia, Lori Dittman, and John Henry Damsky. They were dubbed the Gang of Four by the press.
When we finally passed it on that December 21st in 1988, thereafter, I spent the next 2 weeks every night going out in my car and driving alone around our city, and I would always end up every night on the Skyway. And sorry, this is hard for a moment. To sit on the Skyway and look down and say, you know what? You can't fire gay people anymore. And I will tell you that experience changed my life. To know that, that we would be judged on important things about ourselves. That is, our ability to work, our willingness to pay our rent, not about who we loved.
Backroom politics was one way change was being effected. But direct action groups had another way, and it was wilder. ACT UP, which stood for AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, created a local chapter. They found a galvanizing leader in the volatile Danny Sotomayor.
Daniel Sotomayor, half Puerto Rican, half Mexican, grew up with his brothers and sisters, large family, in Humboldt Park.
I always thought I want to be like him. You know, he was Latino, he was out, he was gay, he was about making change.
We're your brothers, we're your sisters, we're your sons, your fathers, we're everywhere.
And I actually remember seeing him at a bar. I was too in awe to even go up to him and talk to him.
But he had a lot of rage.
Danny became completely made over by AIDS. Just came upon Danny that this was all wrong. Government should be doing more. We should all be more angry.
He was able to gather support from people who probably in a million years wouldn't have imagined going to a demonstration for civil disobedience, being thrown into the back of the paddy wagon.
Was it the first thing I wanted to do, go lie down in the street in front of a policeman on a horse? No. Was it one of the best things I ever did in my life? Absolutely yes.
One of the biggest ACT UP demonstrations Sotomayor took part in was in April 1990. It targeted the American Medical Association. ACT UP accused the AMA of deadly indifference.
There's thousands of people chanting in the streets. There's cops. There's people who are sick who you can tell they probably don't have a long time to live. It was a way to stay alive longer because they were fighting. They were acting up and they were fighting back.
I think it was called the National Day of Action, where they targeted the insurance companies, the American Medical Association, and then the Cook County building.
You know, they got into the county building. They were going to hang their banners, and they were taunted. The only way they could get away from these guards was to climb out the window.
It was great to see Danny Sotomayor unfurl a banner. It was amazing.
And I look up, and there's Danny, there's Paul, there's Tim. So I'm thinking, I wonder if I could catch him.
You can't hide your eyes from the shame of a city that lets us die. Now it is time to act up.
They allowed their anger to come out, even more so than the Vietnam War, because everybody had flowers in their hair then. It wasn't cool to be angry. I'm a great believer in angry.
Sotomayor also doggedly pursued Mayor Daley in his weekly political cartoons. They were sharp, poignant, and relentless.
Danny decided the city of Chicago was not doing enough. And so Danny started stalking Mayor Daley. And wherever Mayor Daley went, there was Danny, unfurling a banner saying, "Mayor Daley, tell the truth about AIDS."
1991, the city announces bold new program called the Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame.
And the first Hall of Fame is a reflection of the spirit of cooperation that will lead to better human relations.
It is a hot day. Danny is not well. He got on the train as sick as he was, raging with fever, and he had posters. And he came to disrupt the very first induction ceremony. And he's screaming,
I want to speak! That restraint, dignity, and determination, get back your awards! Oppression and discrimination.
"Give it back! Give the awards back!" And Daley, tell the truth about AIDS.
And did Danny make me uncomfortable? Absolutely. Do I miss Danny Sotomayor every day of my life?
Sotomayor's disease ravaged him, and by 1992 he spent longer and longer periods of time at Illinois Masonic Hospital's Unit 371.
He was overwhelmed with lots of complications. He fought a good fight.
Sotomayor was too sick to attend an event where he was being honored. It was held by a political action group he considered too timid.
And it was kind of funny. They waited for him to be almost dead before they honored him, because they would know if they did it last year, he would have attacked them.
Sotomayor's partner, playwright Scott McPherson, author of Marvin's Room, attended the event to accept the award for his lover. He returned to the AIDS ward at Illinois Masonic Hospital, where Sotomayor lay dying.
And he went right up to intensive care to talk to Danny about what a great evening it was. And the next day he was gone, just as the sun came up. 7:05, February 5th, was a Wednesday.
And when he died, a part of us all died. And I remember Mayor Daley coming to Danny's funeral and giving him the respect of a fallen warrior. Danny asked my partner and I to take his bird, a large macaw, which had been his first animal and the one he had at the end of his life. And this morning, before I came here to see you, I was handling the difficult, crazy, wonderful, funny greenwing macaw named George, who will live to be 75 or 80. So through this crazy bird, Danny's in my life every day today.
I started getting sick when everybody started getting sick, but it was called a gay cancer. And because I was transgender, I did not consider myself gay. We assumed, and the doctors assumed, this is what we were being told, that it was only being contracted by homosexual men. We had just gotten out of the 70s where everyone was having sex with everybody. I don't think people really understand this. That, like, I think I had sex with Liza Minnelli. I'm not sure. Like, that's how free everybody was. I didn't get diagnosed until sometime in the 90s, early 90s. But the time I was diagnosed, the doctor came in and said, look, you have 7 T cells. Most people have thousands. So you need to get your affairs in order.
Keith Green, a senior at Hyde Park Career Academy and woozy at the sight of blood, reluctantly agreed to donate at a school blood drive.
And I thought nothing else of it until a couple of weeks later, I got a letter from Life Source. We need to see you. And I was like, okay, what's this about? So one day after school, I jumped on the train. Hyde Park is on 63rd, so I took the green line to the blue line, all the way out to O'Hare. And I sat down in front of this woman, and she asked me, did you know you were HIV positive?
What have I done? What did I do? Why didn't I not have sex with that person? Why did I share that needle? What, all this stuff went through my head.
I was 17 at the time. The only thing I could really process or that I could really think of was that my life was over. I told my mom first. She was the first person that I told. She was crushed. She literally fell against the wall and was just in tears. And it kind of broke my heart at the same time too,
It's hard for caretakers, because they have no power. I can't imagine what Chris Ann went through. I don't think any of us can.
If the fundamentalist Christians think they're going to get rid of homosexuality, they thought we were all going to die of AIDS. Well, there's millions of us still left here.
It hurt so bad to lose two brothers to the same frickin' disease and to know that we don't have a cure for that sucker yet.
I think that HIV and AIDS is forgotten. I don't think anyone cares.
Now, it's looked at as a maintenance disease or a chronic manageable disease.
That's how I live. By hundreds of thousands of dollars that you pummel into your body that aren't curing me. Make no mistake. These are not curing me. They're keeping me alive. That's a big difference.
Now the facts, and they are very grim. AIDS always kills. Always.
With AIDS continuing to decimate the community, another direct action group arose, Queer Nation.
We were committed to the visibility, equality of LGBT folks. So there were a number of actions we did over the years. My favorite was the push to have Cook County enact a county-wide ordinance that would protect LGBT folks from discrimination, or at least LGB at the time, folks from discrimination.
When Richard Phelan ran for Cook County president, he campaigned on the issue of wanting to pass a gay rights ordinance for Cook County. Once Richard Phelan was in office, he changed his mind very quickly.
One day, me and several other people from Queer Nation decided to serve him breakfast, and we served him waffles. We actually did shut down the Cook County board meeting.
We were able to go back to Richard Phelan and say, we're going to pass this legislation with you or without you. President Phelan wisely decided that it would be with us.
When the Human Rights Ordinance passed, John and I and a group of us from Queer Nation went to a bar in Harwood Heights called Sideline. We ended up getting arrested for same-sex dancing and actually spent a night in jail. We became known as the Dancing Queens. So under the Cook County Human Rights Ordinance, our case against Sideline's bar was the first to go to trial that involved sexual orientation for Cook County. And we actually settled out of court with the owners of Sidelines. My mom had heard about it. She did tell me at the time, don't bring shame on the house. Shortly thereafter, I moved out and moved in with John.
Tracy Bain, one of the most visible members of the gay press here, struggled to find her path.
I started at age 10 writing for the Chicago Defender and doing a family newsletter and just always wanting to document what was going on. Both my mother and my stepfather are in journalism in Chicago, including covering the 1968 Democratic Convention. I had a difficult time in college because I also was told that you could be a journalist and also care about the issues and have an opinion. I actually attempted to take my life in college because I was so upset that I couldn't be a journalist. It was as much in my blood as being a lesbian was at that point, and I felt I couldn't necessarily be an open lesbian and be a journalist. Once I realized I could work through that and be in an alternative journalism environment, my parents encouraged me in that. I was really fortunate to hit the gay media right when it was just about to take off and be a viable alternative for a journalist.
Jim Darby never came out during his decades as a public school teacher. After he retired, though, his life took an unexpected turn.
In 1991, I met Miriam Ben Shalom, and I think she was the one person who had the most profound effect on my life as far as getting involved. She started the gay veterans movement in 1990. I said, "Who runs the Chicago chapter?" And she leaned over and almost punched me and said, you do. We do a wreath laying twice a year. We always have our own wreath with a big pink triangle in the middle. And I believe it was 1992, the commander of the American Legion was there, and he said, "Well, why didn't you tell me you were going to bring a wreath? I would have put you in the program." And I said, "Fine." When he read the name of our organization, which was called at that time Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Veterans of America, his jaw dropped.
Despite months of pursuing full inclusion, the group remained unsure if they'd be added to the printed program.
No veterans groups named. They wiped out everybody's name from the program rather than put our name in it.
After meeting a group of black gay activists, Renee Ogletree made the brave decision to publicly come out when her friends wanted to march in Chicago's largest African-American parade.
And they said, "You know, we want to take on the Bud Billiken parade because it's the biggest black parade, and we think young lesbians and gays should know that we have a presence." I don't think any of us expected the war, the battle that became.
It had a lot of symbolism on the south side of Chicago.
Being activists, we sent in 2 applications.
We applied it as proud black citizens, and they said yes.
The other group identified as the ad hoc black lesbians and gays.
They said no.
So we then identified ourselves as one and the same. They came to this last-minute decision that we could march. But even then, I have to be honest and say, I wasn't sure I wanted to march in that parade.
I talked to a lot of black gay activists, and they were concerned. They were concerned for safety.
I was scared. I'm not going to tell you a lie. I was scared.
And the response was incredible.
There were more people cheering for us than against us. I remember these little old ladies we passed up by 45th and King Drive saying, "My nephew's gay. You have a right to be here."
I saw courage in action. I saw people who did actually fear for their lives, for their jobs, for their custody of their children, etc., and they did it anyway.
That sparked a lot of advocacy within other LGBT communities of color. So for me, that was one of the watershed moments in terms of Chicago's LGBT history.
We all came together behind Bud Billiken, not to say that everybody believed we needed to be there, but everybody believed that they had no right to say that we couldn't be there.
When you think of the mainstream of the gay community, you often think of white people. And there was a time when in all the gay press, that's all you saw.
I can remember one day reading the newspaper, and it was when Mayor Daley was running for office, and it had this picture of all of these white lesbians and white gay men, and it said, "The gay community supports Mayor Daley." And I remember calling up a couple of the guys that I had met, and they said, "Well, if you write the letter, we'll sign it." So we wrote this fierce letter. The community wasn't just white people and that there were black people, and I became the flaming black lesbian activist of Chicago.
I joined LLENA, which was Latina Lesbianas en Nuestro Ambiente, which was Latina lesbians in our environment. We played very hard, we worked very hard, and probably slept with each other a couple times, and then we fought very hard. It was very explosive, it was very new, it was very raw.
I know many Asian friends of mine have said, you know, I walk into a bar, people cannot see me. The group that I'm involved with now, which is called Eye to Eye, that stands for Invisible to Invincible. It's about creating a safe space for queer Asians.
You can see the development of identity groups in two ways. One, you could see it in reaction to a community that doesn't know how to value diversity. You could also see it as a maturing of our community.
One segment of the community that has constantly fought to find their place are transgender people.
As soon as I was able to understand the difference between, male and female, boys and girls, it didn't fit for me. But, as a young person, you don't have the language yet. You don't know what that's about.
I can't remember a time when theater was not in my life. From the day I was born, I remember my father either being in a plane or being at rehearsal. So I grew up backstage, and he was doing a musical. I can't remember what it was. Oh, Can-Can. Oh, I can't believe I remembered that. Where did that come from? And I really wanted to be in it. Now, mind you, I was 13, male, but I wanted to be one of the Can-Can dancers. I wanted to be the lead hooker.
People who were once seen as central to the public gay world, those people who were the wild queens, are now being pushed to the side and are being treated as marginal, as different, as not belonging, as embarrassing.
I tried to commit suicide by swallowing a bottle of pills. I remember waking up going, yeah, that didn't work. So there's got to be something else. And a year later, I was going through a theater magazine, and in the theater magazine was an ad for the baton with chili pepper on it. And at the bottom it said female impersonation, 2 words I had never heard before, ever in my life.
Please welcome these 3 entertainers from the Baton Show Lounge. We have Felicia, Chili Pepper, and Leslie Ragenet.
Early television talk shows were invaluable to people confused about their gender identity.
Phil Donahue, when he was, big. This was my senior year of high school. He had on the entire cast of the Baton.
How many of you are a little uncomfortable with this? All of you? Really?
At age 19, I was watching a program. It was a talk show. I saw a transgender person who was female born, who identified as male, and that was a relief because I felt like, oh, there it is. That's who I am. That fits for me.
The fact that I saw this show and that it was on while I was home was massive to me. And here were these beautiful, talented, happy women who just happened to be living the life that I needed to live.
It meant a sort of second coming out process for me. And it took me about 20 years to get to that point after I watched that television show.
Having to go into a woman's washroom and not know who's next to me.
Now, mind you, at the time, people were asking questions like, how do you go into the ladies' room and people don't hurt you with rocks? It was very strange. And I'll never forget what they asked Chili. So do you consider yourself a man or a woman? And Chili said, darling, I consider myself a showgirl.
You know what it's like to live in the female form, but when you cross over, you have to relearn.
And as I had these surgeries cosmetically, people started to treat me like I was made of glass, like I couldn't light my own cigarette. I couldn't open my own door.
Now, I can walk into a male-dominated space and feel like I'm heard.
I didn't particularly like the way I was being treated by men because they stopped listening to me, listening to my voice, listening to what I had to say.
It was probably in some ways easier to walk in my female form as an African-American woman. People across the street away from me now, and I'm the very person that they're fearing instead of. And I'm wondering if they're crossing the street, should I be crossing the street?
In American culture, family and gay traditionally have been seen as opposites. They don't intersect.
Stepford is not equal. Stepford is not equal.
I always thought when I first came out that I would never be able to get married just because I was gay.
We've been together about 12 years, and if we could marry, we would marry. The closest thing that we can come to is domestic partner registry.
Robert Castillo and John Pennicuff, the first couple in line to sign up for the county's new domestic partnership registry.
We ended up being the first couple to register for the Cook County Domestic Partnership Registry on October 1st, 2003. We make committed relationships, we have families, and this is important for a lot of us.
The Domestic Partnership Registry does not provide the legal benefits of marriage. It simply documents that people are in a committed relationship in Cook County. But people are committing themselves to each other in public ceremonies that reflect marriage rituals. However, these are not sanctioned by our government.
We got married at the Bailiwick Theater, and there were people that thought we were kidding because this was 11, 12 years ago, so people, not everybody was doing it. I love her, she loves me. It's the one joy in my life that keeps getting bigger. And I know it's one of the reasons I'm here. I know it. I know it. I know it.
I always ask when I meet priests and rabbis and whatever, will you marry us? And they always say, of course not. We were in Washington, D.C. at the Congressional Cemetery. A woman minister was there, and I said, would you marry us? And she said, oh, sure. We froze. Both of us absolutely froze. And she said, now, come on. She said, I'll give you 2 minutes to get your vows together.
We met about 17 years ago. He's the love of my life. The mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, bless his heart, decided that he was going to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. So John and I heard about it, and we decided, you know what, let's go to San Francisco and get married. It was surreal to be there. John, I give you this ring in token and in pledge. Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to San Francisco, we're going to get married, we saw these people doing it, and then a week before we were set to go, they closed it down. They stopped it.
The court ruled that Gavin Newsom had exceeded his authority in issuing the marriage licenses and invalidated all the licenses. I wasn't prepared to have the license invalidated. That was a pretty big shock.
I got online, called City Hall in Toronto, said we would like to get married, and boom, made an appointment. Part of it that was really special was our daughter had been making this pillow to carry the rings on, and it said Papa and Daddy on it, just married. And it was for Macario, our son, to carry.
I'd like to have those 1,000 benefits that are not available to us.
You know, inheritance, I mean, a lot of things that people take for granted, we're unable to do so. Make medical decisions, you know, pick up children.
It is my most important relationship outside of my kids. And the ways in the society that we live in, there are no other words that acknowledge that in the way that marriage does.
For Grimes, getting an Illinois marriage license became possible after transitioning from female to male.
It did play on us. It's just like we can get married now, but we couldn't get married as a seemingly lesbian couple.
Let's get married!
To motivate and galvanize the community around marriage, advocacy groups organized a mock wedding reception.
Thank you for joining us for Gay Games 7. Let one spectacular week begin.
In 1999, a group explored the possibility of bidding for the 2006 Gay Games. It's modeled after the Olympics.
We knew that it was more than about sports. Yes, it was going to be a tournament of many tournaments, but it was also going to be something that could show mainstream society a different view of the gay community. Not just protests in politics and illness, but healthy individuals competing in a wide range of sports.
Noriega and Ogletree were part of a Chicago contingent that went to Germany to meet with the Federation about bidding for the 2006 Games.
Okay, we're going to do this thing. I mean, think about it. 20,000 athletes, 80,000 people from around the world coming to Chicago, not going to New York, not going to San Francisco, but coming to Chicago.
At one point I got to rush into Soldier Field. All the gay game athletes were able to run in, and my kids were way up there.
Mayor Daley was a critical player. His speech at Soldier Field is something that people still talk about today at opening ceremonies for the gay games.
Members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community have contributed to Chicago in every imaginable way. Business, education, arts, neighborhood revitalization and development. They deserve to have the city of Chicago standing on their side, and I will continue to do this as long as I am mayor of this great city.
I entered into the 1 mile open water swim in Lake Michigan. I got a silver medal, and my kids were really thrilled, and all in all, the experience for my family, for myself, was a very positive one.
Not in my community. A battle over the gay games is heating up in northwest suburban Crystal Lake, and not everyone approves.
Crystal Lake's opposition to the rowing competition repeatedly made Chicago's network news.
I think it's offensive. I think it does nothing for the city of Crystal Lake. It benefits us no way, no how.
It's not about sex. It's not about AIDS. It's not about religion. It's not about the 10 Commandments. It's about rowing.
The rowing competition was held in northwest suburban Crystal Lake.
We went on to hold the event in Crystal Lake with incredible support from the Parents and Friends organization up there. It proved to people that homophobia still exists, but it also proved that the pro-gays and the gay community is so much stronger than they are.
Chicago has been home to many community centers over the decades. The center on Halsted grew out of Gay Horizons, which began as a simple phone hotline in the early 1970s. It's one of the country's most dynamic LGBT community centers. It serves young and old and everyone under the queer community umbrella. Activists are also working to build another LGBT center on the south side. The Youth Pride Center plans to open in 2008.
It's inducted into the Chicago Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame.
Lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgender people have a culture unto themselves. Businesses, street fairs, a library.
One of the first things I did when I realized I was gay was that I went to the Gerberhardt Library.
Press. A film fest. Theater companies.
Being up here and having told my story feels amazing.
A rodeo. Choruses. Healthcare agencies. And organizations that fight for equal rights and justice. In 2005, the governor of Illinois signed a law that protects the state's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender citizens from discrimination.
Chicago comes together once a year to celebrate the diversity of the LGBT community. At the end of June, hundreds of thousands attend Chicago's Pride Parade.
The parade is a colorful confluence of the rich fabric of the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community in an out and proud Chicago.
We're not asking for more than other people have. We're asking for the same.
And telling gay history is reminding people that we contributed. We made things to go in their stores. We worked in all the factories in Chicago. We contributed as much as everybody else.
I think history has an enormous power to let people see the world around them in the present differently. Knowing is a form of power. I can't tell you how exciting it is to teach queer studies courses to undergraduates in the city of Chicago in the 21st century.
I always said that's the most disappointing thing for a gay person, is that we fight all our lives to prove that we're the same as everybody else, and one day we get up and realize we are.
They were in love and they were partners, and you know, lots of married people don't have sex. You know, I mean, it's like a, I don't know, that is so not the point.
"2,000 people wanted to see Oscar Wilde. But there are stories that people weren't even necessarily so much interested in hearing what he had to say. They just wanted to see him.
And I says, I want to have sex with you. And he says, you'll have to fight me for it. I said, what? Well, one thing led to another, and I thought, I don't like this.
It takes a lot of energy to live a double life, and it's wasted energy.
I knew I fit. It's like getting a pair of comfortable shoes. They finally feel good. You feel you're home. Like Dorothy, but without the dog. Anyway.
I'd never felt uneasy about it, much less guilty about it, but I was simply uncertain about it. Came to college, got certain.
Well, in the early years, when I opened, this club would not have stayed open if it had not been for lesbians.
It's like we're the one group of people that we don't know ourselves. If you're African American, you get up at 2 or 3 or 4 years old, you look in the mirror, you know you're black. If you're a woman, you know you're a woman. But if you're gay, you don't know it. You don't know who you are.
We have helped make Chicago who it is. And the people who, the LGBT community, we're not just here on the north side. We are all over this city.
I think that the stories that we tell are universal stories. They're not black stories. They're not gay stories. They're not women's stories. They're people's stories.
My activism really came out of the classic cliche, necessity is the mother of invention.
My other friends in the bar business would say, "Are you still running that video zombie bar?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, because your people don't talk."
The fact that I am an out lesbian on the bench, I never would, looking back to my coming out decision in 1973, I never would have thought that this was possible.
I'm a GED girl getting my PhD. Yeah.
I always thought men were more interesting. When I watch Tarzan movies, I always watch Tarzan, not Jane.
I do invoke the names of Danny and Scott and John Henry quite often. Is that living in the past? Is that honoring the past? I'm not sure.
I mean, I kept slipping hints to my dad. Like, can I be Mary Magdalene in Jesus Christ Superstar? You know what I mean? Like stuff like that.
You don't want to be known as Logan the trans man. You just want to be known as Logan, you know, the guy down the street.
I'm a simple, very, very simple guy. I like simple things. Right now, books, music, coffee, I'm good. A little sex every now and then.
Well, I think that's our next thing we need to do. We need to document our legacy to the national movement so that people can see the important people in Chicago and the role that they played in successes here and internationally.
Our son is really into football right now, and we kind of say, how did this happen? You know, two gay men, and we have a football son.
I mean, I am a gay person, but I want to make a better life for everybody. You know, for me, it's important. I believe one person can change the world.